The screams were deafening. Thousands of voices merged into a single roar that shook the walls of the small venue in Gary, Indiana. On stage, a 9-year-old boy moved with the precision of someone 3 times his age. His feet glided across the worn floorboards as if pulled by invisible strings. His voice carried notes that seemed impossible for someone so young. The audience was mesmerized. They saw magic. They saw a star being born. But Michael Joseph Jackson saw something different when he looked out into those bright lights. He saw his father watching from the wings, arms crossed, eyes sharp as razors. Every move had to be perfect. Every note had to soar. There was no room for mistakes in the Jackson household. Michael's childhood evaporated the moment Joe Jackson recognized the gold mine sitting in his living room. 5 talented sons who could sing and dance became his ticket out of the steel mills. Rehearsals consumed every hour that other children spent playing. While neighborhood kids rode bikes and played baseball, Michael practiced spin moves until his legs ached. While others did homework at their own pace, he memorized choreography under his father's unforgiving gaze. The belt waited for those who stumbled. The harsh words came for those who sang off-key. Love in the Jackson home was conditional, measured in applause and dollar signs. The Jackson 5 exploded onto the national stage with a force that shocked the music industry. Their first 4 singles shot straight to number 1. Michael, the youngest performer, became the face of the group. His voice had a quality that defied explanation. It could be tender and vulnerable one moment, powerful and commanding the next. Producers and executives marveled at how this child could channel emotions he had never experienced. They didn't realize he was channeling emotions he knew too well. Loneliness. Fear. The desperate need for approval. Every performance was a plea for love wrapped in entertainment. Behind the scenes, Michael watched other children from the windows of hotel rooms and tour buses. He saw them laugh freely, make mistakes without consequences, exist without the weight of expectations crushing their small shoulders. He collected these glimpses like precious stones, storing them away in his memory. They became the childhood he never had, the innocence he could only witness from a distance. His brothers felt the pressure too, but Michael bore a unique burden. He was the star, the one who drew the crowds. If the group failed, it would be his fault. That knowledge settled into his bones before he was old enough to understand what it meant. The stage became his only safe space, the one place where his worth was undeniable. When the music played and the audience responded, Michael felt something close to peace. The roar of the crowd drowned out his father's criticism. The love from strangers filled the void left by the absence of normal family warmth. He learned to smile through anything. Pain, exhaustion, fear, none of it mattered when the lights came on. The smile became his mask, his shield, his survival tool. It told the world he was fine when everything inside was breaking. Television appearances brought the Jackson 5 into millions of homes. America fell in love with the adorable brothers from Gary, Indiana. Interviewers asked Michael about his hobbies and friends. He gave answers that sounded rehearsed because they were. The truth was too complicated, too dark for family television. How could he explain that his hobby was surviving? That his friends were the musicians twice his age who treated him with the kindness his father never showed? How could he tell anyone that the only time he felt truly alive was when he was performing for strangers? So he smiled wider, spoke softer, and became the image everyone wanted to see. The real Michael, the hurting child behind the superstar, retreated deeper inside where no one could reach him. The decision to go solo sent shockwaves through the music world. Michael Jackson was 21 years old and ready to step out of his brother's shadows. More importantly, he was ready to step out from under his father's control. The break wasn't clean or easy. Family ties tangled with business obligations, and Joe Jackson didn't release his grip without a fight. But Michael had tasted artistic freedom while working on The Wiz, and he craved more. He had ideas burning inside him, visions of what music could be. The Jackson 5 had been his training ground. Now he wanted to build his empire. Quincy Jones became the mentor Michael never had. Where Joe Jackson ruled through fear, Quincy guided through respect and genuine care. He saw Michael's potential and treated him like an artist, not a product. Their collaboration on Off the Wall created something revolutionary. The album blended disco, funk, soul, and pop into a sound that defied categorization. Critics raved. Songs like Don't Stop Till You Get Enough and Rock With You dominated the charts. Michael proved he could thrive without his brothers, without his father's iron fist directing his every move. The album sold millions and earned him his first Grammy as a solo artist. Success should have brought satisfaction. Instead, it fueled an obsession. Michael stood at the American Music Awards and smiled for the cameras, but inside he seethed. Off the Wall had been largely ignored during the Grammy nominations. The industry had given him one award when he deserved armfuls. He returned to the studio with something to prove. The next album wouldn't just be good. It would be undeniable. It would be so massive that every critic, every executive, every person who doubted him would be forced to acknowledge his genius. Thriller wasn't born from joy or inspiration. It was forged in the fire of a wounded ego and relentless ambition. Michael threw himself into the work with an intensity that worried those around him. Nothing could be left to chance. Every note, every beat, every word had to be perfect. The world had never seen anything like Thriller. It wasn't just an album, it was a cultural earthquake. Billie Jean introduced a bass line that made the planet move. Beat It brought rock guitars into pop music and made it seem effortless. The title track's music video revolutionized the medium, transforming it from promotional tool into art form. Michael's moonwalk debut on the Motown 25 special made time stand still. One backward glide across the stage, and he rewrote the rules of performance. MTV, which had barely played black artists, couldn't stop playing Michael Jackson. He transcended race, age, and geography. Thriller sold millions, then tens of millions, then more than any album in history. Michael had done it. He had forced the world to recognize his greatness. But recognition came with a price he hadn't anticipated. Privacy vanished overnight. Photographers stalked him constantly, hiding in bushes and bribing security guards for information. Tabloids printed lies, half-truths, and occasional truths with equal enthusiasm. Every relationship was scrutinized. Every public appearance was dissected. The world that had ignored Off the Wall now couldn't get enough of him. They wanted pieces of Michael Jackson, and they took them without asking. He retreated further into himself, surrounding himself with employees instead of friends. Trust became impossible when everyone wanted something from him. The success of Thriller should have been enough, but Michael's demons whispered otherwise. He stared at his reflection and saw flaws that others couldn't comprehend. His nose was wrong. His skin was wrong. His face carried too many reminders of his father. He began the first of many surgeries, seeking perfection that existed only in his mind. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional anguish that drove him under the knife. Each procedure was an attempt to erase the past, to create a version of himself that felt worthy of the adoration he received. The boy from Gary, Indiana, the one his father had belittled and beaten, still lived inside the world's biggest superstar. No amount of success could silence that wounded child's voice. Neverland Ranch became his fortress. Michael purchased the sprawling estate and transformed it into the childhood he had been denied. Amusement park rides dotted the landscape. A private zoo housed exotic animals. Arcade games filled entire rooms. He invited sick children and underprivileged kids to visit, watching them experience the joy he had missed. In their laughter, he found brief moments of peace. The world mocked his eccentricity, but Michael didn't care. Neverland was his creation, his escape, his attempt to rewrite history. Within those gates, he controlled everything. No father could hurt him. No critics could reach him. No cameras could invade his privacy. He was finally free, or so he tried to convince himself in the deepening darkness of his isolation. The whispers started small, spreading through Hollywood parties and industry gatherings like a slow-moving infection. Michael Jackson was strange. Michael Jackson was eccentric. Michael Jackson was weird. The same qualities that made him a captivating performer became weapons in the hands of a media hungry for sensation. His soft voice was mocked. His gentle demeanor was questioned. His love for children and childlike things was twisted into something sinister. The tabloids that had built him up now took gleeful pleasure in tearing him down. Every headline was more outrageous than the last, each story more fabricated than the one before. Michael tried to ignore the noise, but it was everywhere, inescapable. His changing appearance fueled the frenzy. Plastic surgery had altered his features dramatically, and he couldn't hide the transformation. Michael claimed it was just a nose job or two, that the rest was lighting and makeup. The truth was more complicated. Vitiligo was destroying the pigmentation in his skin, leaving patches of white that grew larger with each passing year. Rather than appear mottled, he began the painful process of depigmentation, evening out his skin tone by removing what remained of his natural color. The physical condition was real, documented by dermatologists, but the public saw only what they wanted to see. The jokes were cruel. Late-night comedians made his appearance their favorite punchline. Sketch shows created characters mocking his voice and mannerisms. The boy who had once charmed the world was now its favorite target. Bad and Dangerous continued his commercial dominance, but something had shifted. The music was darker, angrier. Songs like Leave Me Alone and Scream revealed the toll that fame was taking. Michael poured his frustration into lyrics that the world sang along to without truly hearing. He was begging for understanding while dancing for their entertainment. The concerts grew more elaborate, the spectacles more impressive, but Michael himself seemed smaller somehow, disappearing behind the production. He stopped giving interviews, tired of defending himself against accusations he couldn't disprove. How do you prove you're not strange? How do you convince people to see your humanity when they've decided you're a circus act? Then came the allegations that shattered everything. A 13-year-old boy accused Michael of sexual abuse. The news exploded across every media outlet on the planet. Careers and reputations can survive many scandals, but this was different. This struck at the core of everything Michael valued. His love for children had always been pure in his mind, an extension of his lost childhood and his desire to protect innocence. Now that love was being painted as predatory. The investigation consumed him. Detectives searched Neverland. Prosecutors built their case. Michael's lawyers advised settling, warning that a trial would be brutal regardless of innocence. The media had already convicted him in the court of public opinion. Michael paid the family $20 million to make the case go away. His lawyers celebrated the end of the criminal investigation. Michael felt like he had just admitted to a crime he didn't commit. The settlement proved nothing legally, but in the eyes of many, it confirmed guilt. Why pay if you're innocent? The question haunted him. He tried to explain, tried to make people understand that the trial would have destroyed him regardless of the verdict. The details that would emerge, the intimate examinations, the testimony about his private life, none of it mattered if he was found innocent. The damage would be permanent. But the explanation fell on deaf ears. The settlement became an albatross around his neck, proof of wrongdoing to those who had already decided what to believe. The pain of betrayal cut deeper than any tabloid mockery. Michael had welcomed this boy into his life, into his home. They had talked for hours, laughed together, shared secrets. He had trusted, truly trusted, for one of the few times in his adult life. Now that trust had been weaponized against him. The lawsuit wasn't about justice or protection. It was about money, pure and simple. The boy's father had tried to pitch Michael a screenplay before the allegations. When Michael declined, the accusations began. The timeline was clear to anyone who looked closely, but few people looked closely. They saw a strange man, a man who slept in the same room as children, a man whose behavior defied normal boundaries. The context didn't matter. The explanation was ignored. Michael Jackson was guilty because people needed him to be guilty. Depression settled over him like a fog that wouldn't lift. He turned to prescription medication to manage the anxiety and pain. Sleep became impossible without pills. Performing required pills to manage the stress. Existing required pharmaceutical assistance. His dependency grew quietly, hidden behind the spectacle of continued stardom. Lisa Marie Presley came into his life, offering understanding from someone who knew the burden of impossible fame. Their marriage surprised the world and convinced no one. Critics called it a publicity stunt, another bizarre choice from an increasingly bizarre man. Michael had hoped marrying Elvis's daughter would normalize him, would show the world he was capable of a conventional relationship. Instead, it just gave them more ammunition. The marriage lasted less than 2 years, another failed attempt to be what others expected him to be. The millennium brought no fresh start for Michael Jackson. If anything, his spiral accelerated. The music industry he had once dominated had moved on, embracing new sounds and new stars. His album Invincible, released in 2001, was a commercial disappointment despite decent sales. By Michael's standards, selling 2 million copies in the United States was a failure. He blamed Sony Music, claiming they hadn't promoted the album properly. He staged protests outside their offices, calling the label's chairman a racist. The outburst shocked fans and industry insiders alike. The king of pop was publicly warring with his own record company, burning bridges in spectacular fashion. Financial troubles mounted despite his legendary earning power. Decades of extravagant spending had drained his fortune. Neverland Ranch cost millions annually to maintain. The staff alone numbered over 100 people. The animals required specialized care. The rides needed constant maintenance. Michael's shopping addiction was legendary. He could spend $1 million in a single afternoon buying antiques and artwork. His entourage traveled everywhere with him, all expenses paid. When you're Michael Jackson, you don't hear the word no. Accountants tried to warn him, but he waved away their concerns. He was the biggest star on the planet. The money would always be there. Except it wasn't. The catalog that contained the Beatles' songs, his most valuable asset, was being used as collateral for increasingly desperate loans. In 2003, a documentary called Living with Michael Jackson aired on television. Martin Bashir, the journalist who interviewed him, had gained Michael's trust over months of filming. Michael thought the documentary would show his humanity, would let people see the real person behind the headlines. Instead, Bashir edited the footage to make Michael look as disturbing as possible. The scene where Michael held hands with a young cancer patient and talked about sharing his bed was edited to remove context. What had been an innocent explanation of providing comfort to a sick child became evidence of inappropriate behavior. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Days after the documentary aired, police raided Neverland Ranch with a search warrant. Michael was in Las Vegas recording a special when he heard the news. His sanctuary had been violated. His private spaces were photographed and catalogued. The nightmare from 1993 was happening again, but this time there would be no settlement to make it disappear. The trial that followed was a media circus that made the O.J. Simpson case look restrained. Every day brought new spectators camping outside the courthouse. Fans held vigil, supporters and protesters screaming at each other across police barricades. Inside, prosecutors painted Michael as a cunning predator who used his fame and wealth to abuse children. The defense portrayed him as a naive man-child who was being extorted by a family with a history of fraud. The accuser's mother had a questionable past. Her credibility collapsed under cross-examination. Witnesses contradicted each other. The case that had seemed strong initially began to crumble as details emerged. Michael attended every day of the trial, arriving in pajama bottoms on one occasion because severe back pain had sent him to the hospital that morning. The image of him shuffling into court, clearly in agony, became another headline. His physical deterioration was obvious to anyone watching. He had lost dangerous amounts of weight. His skin looked almost translucent. The stress was literally killing him, but the trial continued for months. Witnesses described Neverland's layout in clinical detail. Prosecutors presented evidence of pornography found on the property, though none of it was illegal or involved children. The defense systematically destroyed the prosecution's case, but none of it seemed to matter. Michael sat silently, listening to his entire life dissected and judged, powerless to defend himself beyond what his lawyers could argue. The jury deliberated for 7 days. Michael waited at Neverland, barely eating, barely sleeping. When the call finally came that a verdict had been reached, he dressed in his finest suit and headed to the courthouse. The walk into the courtroom felt like walking to his execution. 14 charges were read aloud. 14 times the jury foreman said not guilty. Michael Jackson was innocent in the eyes of the law. He should have felt relief, triumph even. Instead, he felt nothing but numbness. The verdict didn't matter. His reputation was destroyed beyond repair. The trial had revealed his eccentricities and vulnerabilities to the entire world. The testimony about his sleeping arrangements, his relationships with children, his strange lifestyle, all of it was now public record. Being found not guilty wasn't the same as being believed innocent. After the verdict, Michael fled. He couldn't stay in America, couldn't bear the stares and whispers. He moved to Bahrain, accepting an invitation from a wealthy sheikh. 4 months, he lived in exile, a ghost of the performer who had once commanded stadiums. His children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, were his only joy. He had protected them fiercely, hiding their faces behind masks and veils, determined to give them the privacy he had never known. Now, in a foreign country far from the scene of his humiliation, he tried to build some semblance of a normal life. But normal was impossible when you were Michael Jackson. The past wouldn't let him go, and the future looked increasingly dark. The pills that helped him sleep became harder to stop taking. The dependency that had been manageable spiraled into something dangerous. He needed help, but asking for it meant admitting weakness, and Michael had spent his entire life being strong for everyone else. The announcement came unexpectedly. Michael Jackson would return to the stage for a series of concerts at London's O2 Arena. 50 shows were scheduled, an ambitious undertaking for any performer, let alone one who hadn't toured in over a decade. The press conference was surreal. Michael appeared fragile, his voice barely above a whisper, but he promised fans something extraordinary. Within hours, all 50 shows sold out. The demand was overwhelming. People who had written him off, who had mocked him and condemned him, suddenly wanted tickets. Michael Jackson was back, and the world was ready to welcome him home. Or so it seemed. Behind the scenes, panic reigned. Michael was in no condition to perform 50 consecutive shows. His body had been ravaged by years of pain, prescription drug abuse, and the stress of constant scandal. Rehearsals were chaotic. Some days he was brilliant, moving like the Michael of old, voice strong and clear. Other days he could barely function, struggling to remember choreography he had invented decades earlier. The production team worried constantly. They had sold millions of dollars worth of tickets to fans expecting perfection. What they had was a broken man trying desperately to reclaim his throne. Dr. Conrad Murray entered Michael's life as a solution to the sleep problem that had plagued him for years. Michael couldn't sleep without pharmaceutical assistance, and standard sleeping pills no longer worked. His tolerance had grown too high. Murray agreed to administer propofol, a powerful anesthetic typically used in surgical settings. It was dangerous, reckless even, but Michael was desperate. 8 hours of proper sleep became his obsession. He didn't care about the risks. He just wanted rest, wanted the racing thoughts to stop, wanted peace from the demons that haunted him in the darkness. Murray set up an 4-drip in Michael's bedroom, turning the Holmby Hills mansion into a makeshift clinic. Every night became a medical procedure. Every morning Michael woke up feeling like he had actual rest. The danger didn't register. He trusted the doctor, believed he was safe. June 25, 2009, started like any other day of rehearsals. Michael was tired but determined. The show was called This Is It, and he meant it. This would be his final tour, his farewell to performing, his last chance to show the world what Michael Jackson could do. The rehearsal went well. He danced, he sang, he showed flashes of the brilliance that had made him a legend. His last words to the crew were about the music, about making it perfect. He returned home exhausted but satisfied. The concert was 3 weeks away. Everything was coming together. He just needed sleep. He always needed sleep. Conrad Murray administered the propofol around 10:40 a.m. Michael drifted off peacefully, finally escaping consciousness. Murray left the room, made phone calls, stepped away from his patient. When he returned, Michael wasn't breathing. The doctor panicked, starting CPR on the bed instead of moving Michael to the floor. He called for help too late. Paramedics arrived to find chaos. They tried everything, following protocols, pumping medications, shocking the heart that had given rhythm to 1 billion dancing feet. Nothing worked. Michael Jackson was pronounced dead at UCLA Medical Center at 2:26 p.m. The official cause would later be listed as acute propofol intoxication. The manner of death, homicide. The news spread across the globe at the speed of light. Websites crashed under the traffic. Television stations dropped regular programming. Strangers wept openly in the streets. The same media that had tormented him for decades suddenly mourned him like a fallen saint. The irony was crushing. In death, Michael received the empathy that had been denied him in life. Millions who had believed the worst about him now celebrated his genius. The music played on every radio station. His videos dominated television. Fans created memorials at his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, at Netherlands Gates, outside the hospital where he died. The world realized too late what it had lost. The memorial service at the Staples Center was watched by billions. Performers who had studied Michael's every move paid tribute. His brothers carried his casket, the same brothers he had outgrown but never truly left behind. His daughter Paris, just 11 years old, approached the microphone and said what everyone needed to hear. "Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. I just wanted to say I love him so much." Her voice broke, and so did the hearts of everyone watching. This wasn't the monster the tabloids had created. This was a father loved by his children, a human being who had given everything to his art and received judgment in return. Michael Jackson died at 50 years old, decades too soon but perhaps not soon enough to escape the pain that had defined his existence. He left behind a catalogue of music that will outlive everyone reading these words. He left behind dance moves that will be imitated for generations. He left behind 3 children who would grow up knowing their father primarily through old videos and other people's memories. He left behind questions that will never be fully answered about his innocence, his choices, his bizarre life. But most of all, he left behind a stark reminder that fame is not the same as happiness, that success cannot heal childhood wounds, and that the world is quick to build heroes up and even quicker to tear them down. Michael Jackson showed us the smile. Now we finally understand the pain. The music plays on, eternal and perfect, while the man who created it rests at last, free from the spotlight that had been both his salvation and his curse since he was too young to understand what he was giving away.